So now it's my pleasure to introduce this morning's keynote speaker, the Assistant Secretary for Defense, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Acquisition, Ms. Katrina McFarland. In this role, she is the Principal Advisor to the Secretary of Defense and the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition Technology and Logistics on matters relating to acquisition. Previously, she served as the president of DAU, the Defense Acquisition University, where she continued to build DAU's outstanding reputation as DoD's primary learning institution while overseeing the development and expansion of acquisition curriculum and supporting learning opportunities for over 150,000 members of the defense acquisition workforce. Under her leadership, DAU provided practitioner training, career management, and services to enable acquisition technology, logistics, and requirements communities to make smart business decisions and deliver timely and affordable capabilities to the warfighter. Please join me in welcoming Katrina McFarland to Acquisition Excellence.
Hey. Well, good morning. What an honor. It was sort of unexpected when Joni asked if I'd be interested in speaking to you all, but it was also a real revelation to see that all of our communities in acquisition focus on trying to improve ourselves, which is, of course, the focus of this enterprise effort today. So I applaud you all. I think when I look at the acquisition community writ large across the federal agencies, we do a real hard job. It's especially hard right now, and I'm not talking just the government, I'm talking industry. When we're in such an unusual climate for us, given what we've had over the last 10 years, trying to use our skills, hone them, improve them, to get what is the best product we can is going to be essentially the toughest jobs that we've had. There is not going to be one corner that a critic won't be found, right? It's tough. Luckily, we have people such as Nick and others that have come together with the industry community and have said, we want to make sure that we're communicating, like Nick just talked about, and that we're going to make sure that we're improving so that what we do is understood by all. When we have such a budget climate, one of the challenges we face, and this is not peculiar to defense, it's for all of us, is how do you make the best use of that money, but also how do you prioritize against what you have for resources? How do you determine what's important? How do you communicate with the users to find out what's really needed, not what is necessarily wanted, right? Tough. How do you get to that line that says, okay, we can afford this, we know what we have for a full life cycle cost for it. We understand what it'll take to train our people to use it. And we essentially know what type of contract vehicle is the best to procure it. How do you incentivize? How do you get it delivered? How do you manage the oversight of the contract to ensure the right delivery with the right quality that you're seeking? All of those things we do as a natural business practice. It's not clearly understood across, the enterprise. The people that do acquisition, and I reflect back on the presidency of the university, a lot of folks come in and say, geez, this isn't logical. It doesn't make sense to me. Why do we have to do it this way? Don't ever stop those questions from happening. In this particular environment, when people come in and say, gee, I'm challenged here, I don't quite understand. Don't immediately shut it off. Explore it. The environment's unusually receptive right now for new ideas, even in acquisition. I'm going to go through a couple initiatives that we're engaged in that might give you ideas for yourselves to work on. And it was all sponsored or spurred by this incentive caused by the declining budget. So here we have all these challenges. In our department, we saw this coming in around 2010. And what we did was, at that time, Dr. Carter, recently the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and at that time the Undersecretary, said, I need to do something to help our workforce to be able to do their jobs better, because it's going to be tougher. And we need to improve so that the monies that we have go farther. And it's all about improving the excellence, the velocity, and the training of our workforce. So you couldn't have picked a better kind of statement of what this all is about. So what we did, or I should say he did, is he reached out through the services and the agencies and said, bring me subject matter experts. I want to have them come together. I want them to look at what we do in this business, and I want them to seek out practices that can get across to our workforce opportunities, things that they can engage in to improve outcomes relative to their acquisition, right? So there was about, I think there was almost 53 of us. We had reached back to all of the acquisition workforce. I was a co-chair along with a gentleman by the name of Jim Thompson, who's the principal civilian deputy for the Navy. And we put together, over a period of about 6 months of intensive work, approximately 325 initially that was reduced and distilled down to 23. The distilling process was based on effectively taking a look, and we used folks like GAO and others, of what had successes that the workforce could pick up immediately and execute to without having a great deal of training. And I'm going to pause here for a moment and explain why. I'm not sure if everybody felt this, but I'm pretty comfortable y'all did. In the 1990s, we thought that we would reap the dividends from the end of the Cold War. Everybody remember that? I might be the only oldest person in here, let's see. Okay. All right, so all of you remember, and that's when I entered in the workforce, by the way, in the early 80s to mid-late 80s. And at that time, the idea was, well, we don't need all this acquisition workforce. Industry can do this better. Industry can deliver cheaper, faster, and better without all the government bureaucracy and oversight. And so thousands, I repeat, thousands of government workers were released. During that period of time, we also thought that the rules and regulations were horribly bureaucratic, and they weren't necessary, and they were costing us a great deal of funds that could be better spent elsewhere. So we pushed those out as well. Have any of you been in that period of time, recall all of that change? Yeah, quite a few of you. There was initiatives called Large Systems Integrators, Total System Performance. Very new ideas that at that time really gained a huge amount of momentum. And what occurred with A76 and all these other initiatives is essentially the workforce was reduced in terms of the acquisition workforce in the Department of Defense to about 20% of an initial level. So by the end of all of this sort of coming to fruition, it was around the year 1999, 2000. And what happened? 9/11. And we discovered we had to really work fast to get our capabilities in our department to the warfighter as efficiently and as effectively as we could. And so we focused on pushing product out the door, not necessarily honing our business skills. Nor were we really attuned as a government to have a good customer-provider relationship. As a customer, we really didn't have the skills to know what was a good deal and what was a good solution. We couldn't even put necessarily the requirements on the table. Effectively, we were a bad customer. But we were able to push money through and buy, and it was an important thing, and it is not a negative in my statement. We were able to get equipment to our forces. We did. We spent a great deal of money doing so. So here we are, back to my point of breaking off. And it's during the period of time between 2008 and 10, we recognized we had some challenges. The Hill wasn't happy with us. We had huge cost overruns on our programs. They weren't delivering. They weren't performing, and we had a challenge. We wanted to also help our workforce improve in their skills. So, thanks to Congress worked with us, and in 2008, they developed the Defense Acquisition Workforce Development Fund. The purpose behind that was to retool our workforce so that they could bring in skills to be able to do this job better. And we started on that path. And in 2010, the initiative I began this little story with began. And from that 23 initiatives, we focused on what could be done immediately as the budget was turning down to help those people as we were adding to them and providing them additional training to improve their skills. At that point, in about 2010, we had about a 12% overrun on average. For all you, that's actually a lot of money. Against what was the independent cost estimate. The department requires us to conduct an independent cost estimate because historically we have not performed well in sticking to what our original cost estimates were for the product that we wanted to procure. Now, I can give you a lot of forensics on why that was so, but just let's stick to the fact that we had a challenge even meeting those. At the conclusion of about 2 years into the initiation of Better Buying Power, we were actually demonstrating not only we were meeting the independent cost estimating levels, we were actually below them. For us, that was a tremendous win. Those tools begat the second level of Better Buying Power, which was the nomenclature we gave. And the initiatives were essentially simply continuous process improvement. They weren't new, novel ideas per se. They were effectively going back to the basics. Nick mentioned lowest price technically acceptable. We had initiatives that were embedded in the Better Buying Power in terms of procurement strategies, in terms of contracting, in terms of service providers, et cetera, that were very precious to us, and we had a big problem in communicating. That's why I find this forum remarkably useful. We would put into writings, and I will quote this because I helped write it, when appropriate, use fixed price incentive fee contracts with a 120/80, and I won't go on, but essentially what people read was use fixed price incentive fee contracts. Now, at the risk of saying people don't read, people don't read. We had a challenge, right? Communication. We had been, over the years, brutalizing our acquisition workforce. We always, the public, the press, everyone said, oh, those people, they can't deliver on time. They didn't look at the underlying problem, which thankfully Congress did with us, and we are obviously taking a look at, which is we have to have a healthy, trained, experienced workforce to be a good customer. They had just put out how all the bad press was, right? Everybody's been exposed to that. There is no one here that hasn't had something come up that they read about and they said, that's not true. That's not what happened. So how do you reaffirm to the workforce that not only are they good people, we understand their pain, we really want to help them to be able to do their job well, and then we're there to defend them. That was pretty much the third part of Better Buying Power 1.0 and 2.0, which we are acting on right now. And in 2.0, we put in there improving the professionalism of our acquisition workforce. And we put that in the front end of that second initiative so that people understood we really were working with them, that these Better Buying Power initiatives, and whoever walks up here, be careful, were actually going to be tools to help them. And we weren't beating them about the ears to go do something. This was intended to make them think. And in fact, in Better Buying 2.0, we put in the front a guide to help you think. Now I'll return to that earlier conversation. That's why when you hear somebody come in with an idea that they say, this doesn't make sense, or I think I've got a thought that might work, please do not turn them off. One of the biggest challenges we've had over the time is that we say, do this, don't walk out of the box. And they do that. After a while, that's all they will be able to do because we have not afforded them the opportunity to think broader. So, Better Buying Power 2.0 also brought with it a reward system. We wanted to bring forward from our masses the ability to recognize people at a very senior level for what they have done to improve the situation in acquisition. So we brought forward acquisition awards, effectively procurement awards. And the person who delivered those rewards was the Secretary of Defense. Never in our history did we have that happen in the past. In addition, myself, the under deputies, all travel out to workforce centers of mass. We get up on the stage, I've got proficient at this, and we talk to our communities, like I hope to talk with you in a few minutes. We listen to what they have to say, and we also have small group meetings. And the purpose of that is to have them actually hear from the quote-unquote horse's mouth what we really meant, and to ask them, how is it going? Is it a good idea? Is it working for you? And if it's not, tell us why. So I'll refer to LPTA. We want to use LPTA, and we talk about it in some of our initiatives because we are demanding that they understand technically acceptable. Because one of the problems we ran into in contracting relative to being able to do best value was, if you do not understand what technical acceptability is, how do you really understand what best value is? Does it ring a bell with anybody in here? And when you really understand that piece, technically acceptable, that should be your first step to then underlying, which is another of our initiatives, what is best value and really how much are you willing to pay for it? In certain cases, when you mow a lawn, TP is probably, technically acceptable is probably all you need, and then it becomes a cost issue. Who can perform that task at mowing it 3 inches high across the infrastructure of your base regularly and keep it at 3 inches high? That's pretty much your cost, quality assurance plan. So, LPTA, when used appropriately, is a good tool, but it shouldn't be used if you're trying to seek innovation. We in the department chase a lot of innovation, right? Not everybody has to park a Joint Strike Fighter in their backyard. So we have to demand from ourselves and from industry the ability to react to the threat because it's meaningful to us, and the ability inside of that resiliency is to deliver a product that can actually do what we need to do it and do it within cost, schedule, and performance, but there is a risk. There isn't any current Joint Strike Fighters out there. So we have to develop something that doesn't exist, and therefore we lean towards best value and cost kind of contracts, because that is a shared risk. At a certain point during that development phase, we naturally transition to a fixed price incentive type of contract because we have cost certainty and the risk has been ameliorated. So, without proselytizing about contract vehicles for very long, one of the things that we do is actually go out and talk with the community to help them understand those opportunities and also to share with us their experiences. So Better Buying Power 2.0, which picked up from 1.0, carried a lot of the things that are important to us that we communicate, such as affordability. Now, affordability, we have a lot of confusion over the first year of putting that on the table, and still do in many cases because our organization is very far-reaching. And a lot of the people down, let's say in Guadalcanal, don't necessarily hear, they only see the written word. Affordability is not cost avoidance, cost savings, should cost, no. Affordability is similar to when you go out and intend to purchase your first home. What can you afford? Against all the other demand signals that you have, what can you afford? That affordability translates into a 5, 10, 15, 20-year plan against all of those other areas in that portfolio. Let's choose IT because that's the forum today, that you need to buy. Have you laid in your total ownership cost? Remember me talking about that earlier? Have you laid in that total ownership cost against what you have in that area to spend? We do stand charts to describe that because we know our programs fairly well. We can say, oh, did you include this ERP when you built that sand chart? Well, how are you going to trade that area? Because we see an upswing in the cost for that, and that doesn't show very much space for buying additional things out here in this year. So affordability is something everyone needs to consider. We have a history of procuring things that we didn't take into account the full ownership cost of. So affordability is one very important cultural change that we brought to the organization because we had spent billions and didn't produce with it. And we can't afford that. No pun intended. So the next initiative that's important in terms of changing the thinking process is should cost. Let's go back to my little independent cost estimate comment. Should cost says, okay, I got it. You have an independent cost estimate that says if all these things go horribly wrong, we expect this program to cost this much. Right? How many of you ever seen an independent cost estimate? A few of you. That's good. When you have that, what you do as a program manager with your team is you pull that all apart. You look in there for opportunities. They said, I could not fill in the blank. Let's see if we can. And how do we do that? Should cost is, how much should this thing cost if I did it right, or if I change things to remove costs out of the program? Should cost is a tool that I encourage you to work with your people on, both in the government and in industry. The intent is, I need to have that money for buying and delivering product. I don't need it to go to an area where it did not provide the value I needed it to. So if you take a should cost effort, it has to be a meaningful, actionable task that a program manager and his team take on. They actually put a schedule together and the actions they're going to take to pull that cost out of the program. The reward system is they get it back. So if they have a 1 to N list of all the things they want to do, they get to start burning down their 1 to N list. The exception to that rule is if the service or the agency or the department needs that for a higher bill. For example, when the gas bill soared, should cost, because we were already working on those initiatives, was able to cover down on a lot of those fuel costs that were unexpected. So the department didn't have to come back to the Treasury or to other sources or kill programs to fund for it. Win-win. Competition is one of those tools to create should cost. Competition in itself isn't just at the product level. Competition can be at a subcomponent level. Competition is an environment. It's not just a FAR tool. Think of those things. Let me give you examples briefly, because I know y'all want to have a chance to ask questions, or at least I hope you do. One of the things that's important inside of competition is if I have a product, today's environment says industry procures to deliver. That is, instead of necessarily build from bottom up, they bring other industrial partners together, they subcontract, and they deliver. If, in the eyes of the government, the terms of those conditions warrant an opportunity to lessen cost by competing that component out, it should be engaged in. We had a gear system for a Navy vessel that we saw savings of over the life cycle of the program, approximately $800 million by doing that. That's a big deal. That helps buy other things. So competition isn't just at the prime. Competition can be at the subs. Remarkable likeness. In terms of the rest of the tools, I'm going to now take my last few minutes before I open it up for questions to the workforce again. When we go to these types of forum, when you have leadership that obviously is interested in your people, in their people. The part that's most important is that people start recognize their own responsibilities in managing and helping folks. All of us have skills. All of us can help others. All of us are essentially teachers. Part of the acquisition professionalism of the workforce is inculcating that into our department. That is, at any opportunity, if you see someone out there, not only offering your help, but mentoring them. And if they fall, pick them up. Don't bury them. This organization, this environment, is not just one single person standing alone. It's everybody working together. And that includes industry. There is an opportunity for all of us to succeed. We just have to seek and find it. Much of what we do is not understood by many, so we need to communicate. Much of what we do is hard, therefore we have to really work and think. So as you engage in your daily efforts, consider all the things that you can do to work with and help others to succeed. My goal in life is to have a different job soon because this job is working so well, I don't have to stay. Everyone should have that opinion, that there's other things to do, because truthfully, there is very much to do, as we all know. And there isn't one place or one position that's so important that it needs to have your holding onto it so tight that you don't share with others to give them a chance to grow. So I'm going to stop here. I'm going to offer you all some chances to ask questions about acquisition excellence and what we're doing, or offer your thoughts so I can have a chance to learn, hint, hint, and anything else that you guys want to engage in. I'm here for a few minutes, and I'd like to make it worthwhile to both of us. And the lights are very bright, so I have no clue if anybody's raising their hand up here or not. Nobody should be shy.
So thank you for your talk. I was wondering, typically the contracting office and the program office have different metrics and different leadership. How do you guys incentivize the two of them working together to make sure the mission is accomplished?
That's a very good question, because it's not uniform or consistent in the department, and it's one of the areas we're obviously very engaged in. I came through several different organizations. My favorite was when the contracting officer was working inside of my office as part of my team. That actually is the predominant example in the department, I'm grateful to say. In terms of incentivizing the contracting officer to be part of your team, however, you have to have them as part of your team. They're not the person where you come over and say, here's my statement of work, go do this. You can't just throw a package over. You actually should be there with them, and they should be part of your team when you're building the acquisition strategy, what it is that you want to accomplish, because they have the toolkits. So when you're sitting at the table and you're pondering what your next item is that you may buy, let's take IT. That's what you're doing. You should have them at the table with you when you define what your requirements are, what you want to have, why does it have to do what it does, how fast do you need it, what cost are you seeking, how do you want to effectively look at those costs, what type of market research should we actually look at. They're the partner, and if they feel enfranchised, they will work with you. If you disenfranchise them, that is, give them the work and then walk away, and then don't help them with the communications with industry or actually understand what it is that the sections L and M, if you're doing a competition, should be. And I might be speaking brief because I stick to the DFARS, which is more complex, I guess. If I'm the contracting officer and you're not with me at the table, how am I going to understand that? So they don't have to live with you in your office space, but if you continuously bring them into the fold and make sure that their community gets feedback on how that performance is engaged in what is the product to deliver, has ownership of that product when they deliver it, you'll get the best that you can. Next, good question. Please.
I'm from Veteran Health Administration. We see a lot of sole source justification, too many.
I'm sorry? You see a lot of...
Sole source justification approvals.
Sole source, yes.
And the reason always is, we are different because the veterans' health is at stake. So we need to have this particular service only, or only this particular source can meet our requirements. How do we go about turning that around?
I'm very familiar with sole source and competition challenges. It's very, very hard internally to the government to break free from what I will call vendor lock. Culturally, the area that's asking for the product has to really understand the product well enough to understand where the risks are and aren't. There are real risks. The driving force, however, for that risk should not subsume, if at all possible, the entire product as part of the trail that ties to that sole source justification. Even when we have missile systems in the Department of Defense and people can understand the safety and other implications from missile systems, we still work to engage in competition. It's very challenging to get people to think differently about how to create that competitive environment that you're seeking. I don't know the community that you're dealing with, but if they're here, I would offer to them they really need to take and break down the full complex of what it is that that system delivers and look at discovery in terms of where inside of that system an opportunity might exist. Anybody else?
Good morning.
Good morning.
And thank you for the talk. It's really helpful. First of all, I'd like to thank you and AT&L for actually listening, to industry, when we were formulating Better Buying Power 2.0 around LPTA. So I think a lot of the right words were incorporated in 2.0. And a couple things. One, there was a clause in there about DPAP being responsible to start training the people on the ground on the new guidance. I'm wondering, how's that going? Because it's one thing to change the guidance at the top. It's another thing to get the people at the bottom to actually recognize it and start to incorporate it. And second part of the question is, I assume there's going to be a Better Buying Power 3.0. And do you anticipate any major changes in that, particularly around LPTA?
In terms of LPTA and our ability to reach out to the workforce, DPAP has an annual convention, frankly, just like this, where they actually provide those training opportunities to their workforce. There is one element that I am not able to make up fast enough. I mentioned earlier that we had pretty much wiped out a lot of our workforce. Contracting, the area of contracting, the 1100 series, is one of our most challenged areas to retain and to develop. A lot of my workforce is very junior. Their experience levels aren't that high. So we try very much to reach out to everybody. We also at the university provide these mission area assistance modules where we actually go to sites and locations and train people. Have we gotten it perfected? No, we have a lot of work to do yet. I would say when you have about 157,000 defined acquisition workforce people, which are only one drop in the water of the total acquisition workforce that we actually have going, that's a challenge. It is improving. The industry feedback indicates so. But anytime you see the improper use of a contracting tool, please contact us. We really listen. On your second question, Better Buying Power 3.0. We actually have started about a year ago, starting to collect initiatives that feed into what would be 3.0. We have about a 2-year cycle that we like to make sure we've implemented fully the BPP initiatives that we started and to examine fully the initiatives that are being developed. My anticipation is in probably next year we'll start coming out with them. I don't believe there's any more news about LPTA. I could be wrong. I've still got time to collect. I'm still the chair for it. Some things never go away, and that's okay. And especially this job, it's important. But I expect there's going to be some service contracting discussions for knowledge management purposes, and service contracting is such a large spend. So I think things like that will be in there. Anyone else? Please.
My question has to do with DOD's use of interagency contracts, such as GSA schedule. I do understand recently DOD issued a fall deviation that removes GSA's determination of fair and reasonable pricing at the schedule level, and so require DOD ordering contracting officers at the order level do the fair and reasonable determination. So my question is, what can GSA and other agencies that provide interagency acquisition support to DOD can do better to better serve DOD's needs?
I would have to ask you to talk to Dick Ginman, who is the head of the defense procurement activity. I'm not aware of exactly that ruling, and he is, and he'd be able to help you. Anybody else?
Good morning. The question is, your perspective, and appreciate you sharing what you already shared this morning on lowest price technically acceptable. But in the situation and case where there really are no defined requirements, but rather particular manufacturer's bill of materials, and it's being sourced on a lowest price technically acceptable basis without a sole source justification, and simply an or equivalent situation, where clearly you're not going to get broad competition because all manufacturers innovate with some sort of proprietary features to their brand.
Wow. First of all, I wouldn't let out an LPTA without having very clearly defined technically acceptable parameters in the document, so I don't know how to help you. I'm sure this happens, again, reflecting back on our workforce and the skill sets. I'm sure things are challenging because if you do not understand the tool and do not understand how the tool needs to work, you're going to stumble around a bit. But I would say that without having truly, carefully, and firmly define what is technically acceptable, and that's not an easy task, but it's a necessary one, you cannot use the LPTA tool appropriately. So I don't know how to help you. Sorry. Anybody else? Please. All right. Thank you. Thank you.